History at 11. All right, back here at Brady Quinn and Pete Prisco, I'm Tommy Tran. So again, before we get to specific matchups, some dominant storylines here, Pete. I remember your very first power rankings had the Detroit Lions at 15.
Oops.
And I said they were a little too low.
A little too low.
Yeah, they should have been a little bit higher.
There's a number of us who've talked about that throughout the course of your power rankings and where you'd put them, and you just disregarded that Week 1 performance they had.
What did they prove to you now on the cusp of getting to the Super Bowl?
That they can score a lot of points and they still have defensive issues. That's who they are as a football team. I mean,
backhanded compliment every time.
Well, it's been a great season for them. It would be a great story if they get to the Super Bowl. It'd be phenomenal. I think Dan Campbell's done a great job. They're still not very good on defense. I mean, you can't sit here and say they are. They've had struggles on defense the entire second half of the season. They've had big problems stopping the pass. Baker Mayfield threw all over them last week. But it's a great accomplishment for them to be here. I didn't think they would be here, I'll be honest with you. And I did think the 49ers would be here, but I didn't think they would be here.
Okay, that's one of the storylines. I think the other storyline, though, is the Detroit Lions. It is the turnaround that Dan Campbell, this front office, this coaching staff, this locker room has been able to make in the past 3 years. And they've literally changed the culture there in Detroit. I think early on in the playoffs, the concern was, is this the same old Detroit Lions? Is this just a good season? Is it a flash in the pan? I think they're here to stay. It's a young group. It's a group that I think they built through toughness, grit, physicality at the line of scrimmage. I love the way they play. I think they embody Dan Campbell in a lot of ways. And so that, to me, has been one of the best storylines. Is a franchise that has been starving for success now has the opportunity not only to win an NFC Championship, but to get to a Super Bowl. In a 3-year span, they've turned this whole thing around. And they're taking on one of the most historical franchises, Pete.
Look at that. In 1957, when I covered Bobby Lane back in the day, I remember I thought he would come back and they'd win it again. I'm kidding, Tommy.
But you have to admit, too, though, you have covered the NFL for a long time.
Yeah.
And the 49ers are one of the most storied franchises, one of the most successful franchises. Even during Kyle Shanahan's run, their model of consistency to be in the NFC Championship game. That's, to me, is the biggest storyline, is this up-and-coming culture-changing team in the Lions taking on what has been one of the most dominant teams, I think, without having that Super Bowl title with them in the 49ers, at least in recent years.
The best part of it, too, with the Lions, people thought that Jared Goff was going to come in and be the stopgap. He was going to be a guy that, he'd be there, they get rid of him. And the way he's played, and it's sustainable now because of the way he plays in this offense. They're going to be, you're right, they're going to be around for a while. They're not going anywhere. This team is young, and they have their quarterback because Jared Goff has played really good football this season.
The question is going to become, if Ben Johnson's no longer there after this year, then what happens to the offense? Because that has been a perfect match between a quarterback and a play caller where both have obviously benefited. But again, I think to your point, Jared Goff has proven to people why he was the #1 overall pick, and that maybe if he was around for that second opportunity to Super Bowl in LA, maybe he would have been the guy to win it too.
You brought up San Francisco. We know they are an upper-tier franchise in terms of most successful in NFL history. Recent history tells us sometimes injuries have derailed them, like, Brock Purdy's elbow last year. Deebo Samuel's expected to play in this game without limitations, but seemingly the pressure is on San Francisco, and the expectation is that they'll get there to Vegas at the end.
Yeah, and in part because they've been so dominant. They have such a talented roster. They're a team that's loaded with first-round draft picks where they stack this thing up. I mean, you put them on paper versus anyone else. It's why everyone at the beginning of the year was like, yeah, that's going to be one of the favorites to win it all, or at least get to the Super Bowl. And that's where we're at now. It just comes down to me, how this team is able to perform, not only up front defensively, and then on Brock Purdy. And look, Brock Purdy, for all of the criticism that he takes, he makes throws when he needs to. He did it last week versus Green Bay. He had some throws throughout the course of the game. Look, the conditions weren't perfect. He wasn't perfect. He didn't need to be. He doesn't have to be on this team. He can still be able to manage things and make plays when called upon like he's done, and they can win a Super Bowl. So credit, again, the roster construction, John Lynch, the front office, but also Kyle Shanahan. It feels like Pete, he always puts Brock Purdy and those different chess pieces he has on offense in positions to succeed.
Here's how good they are. They overcame the stupidity of trading up for Trey Lance. Think about that for a second. That could have been a disaster for the franchise, and they're so talented because they made up for it along the way at other spots and other picks, including Brock Purdy. Yeah. But if Brock Purdy wasn't in there and Sam Darnold was playing quarterback, Would they be that much worse off? I mean, they wouldn't be as good because Purdy's better than Sam Darnold, but how much worse would they be? And I give you credit. Kyle Shanahan is the guy.
Yep.
He is the guy. This offense works because it's star heavy, but it also works because Kyle Shanahan makes it work. When you take the offense apart, you pick it apart, okay, McCaffrey's a great player. Kittle's a great player for their position. There's no question. Trent Williams, top player at his left tackle spot. I mean, Debo, Ayuk. So I think you could put somebody in there. I'm not taking away from Purdy because he's done it. But it goes back to the system and Kyle Shanahan and the stars around it.
To your point, look, Jared Goff was the #1 overall draft pick, okay? Lamar Jackson was a first-round draft pick, okay? Patrick Mahomes, first-round draft pick. Look, all these guys were viewed differently coming into the league. And just because Brock Purdy was the last pick taken, doesn't take away from the success he's had since he's got in the league, but he doesn't have the same skill set, all right? He's not going to run and be as dynamic as a runner as Lamar Jackson. He doesn't have the arm of Patrick Mahomes or even Jared Goff for that matter. You can say those things and you can still compliment Brock Purdy for the job he's done in the system that he's in, the situation he's in, and the way he's been able to lead this team and succeed. There's nothing wrong with saying that. I think the problem is we feel like with Brock Purdy, you either have to be all for him and say he's like the greatest ever, or you have to say, oh no, it's a matter of time before he turns into whatever was the last pick of the draft. There's somewhere in the middle where there's a conversation to be had about the fact that he's playing extremely well, he's been clutch, and there's certain intangibles and measurements that you're not going to get through the combine, that you're not going to always find out on film. You're not going to find out until you get the guy in your locker room on your team and he's able to go out and execute.
One quick thing. If you took the 49ers and you said how many of their guys are top 5 at their position, you'd have the most in the league, any team in the league.
Yeah. And that's a credit to GM John Lynch and Shanahan, as you mentioned. Top matchup for this game, Pete Prisco as well.
I'm going to go with the Lions offensive line against the San Francisco defensive front. And the reason I say that is, and what do I always say, if you block them, you beat them. I think they're vulnerable in the secondary if you block them. It's not going to be easy. Jonah Jackson's out at left guard. Oshika's in. I wanted you to say that. He's in at left guard. Every time you go down to an offensive lineman, it changes the dynamic of the front. But I think they're good enough to block them up front. I really do. Here's the other thing. Run the ball. Coming out of my mouth, it's hard to believe I'm saying that, but run the ball. Why? You go back to Cardinals, and I think it was 5 weeks ago, the Cardinals ran for 190 yards on them. You go back to last week, the Packers, Love had a good day throwing it, but Jones looked great running it. And I think the Lions will try and establish the run because everything they do is based off that play action. So run the ball. That means being physical up front, running the football, and then protecting. I think they'll be fine in protection. I'm worried about the run game. Can they get that going?
Yeah, and look, that's where Jared Goff is most impactful is off the play action pass, and especially when he gets into a rhythm, man, he can be lethal. So clearly, I think Dan Campbell wants to set the tone from a physicality standpoint on both fronts. The interesting thing, though, about Oshika, replacing Jonah Jackson is, much like on the outside, when we talk about games and matchups that we're looking for, whether it's man-to-man, third down, red zone, that you look at it that way across the front, and in particular on must-passing downs, when you know it's 3rd and 7+, 3rd and 8+, you know they got to throw the football. That's when you're going to see what the defense for the 49ers does with those matchups, because everyone's looking forward to Nick Bosa and Penei Sewell and all these guys on the edges. It ain't going to be how it's going to work, because they'll find ways of getting Bosa matched up on Oshika, on that weak point that they see. Frank Ragnow's got a laundry list of injuries. They're going to find ways of testing out that front, to your point. Now, that being said, my matchup's on a different level, though. I'm more curious to see how the 49ers linebackers, which is one of the strengths of their defense, Fred Warner, Dre Greenlaw in particular, match up with Sam Laporta, match up with Jahmyr Gibbs. Because you better believe Ben Johnson's going to be looking out there and say, yeah, we like our matchups on the outside, but also we have to be able to find in the red zone, third down, those matchups too with our running back, our tight end, on their linebackers. And I think it's going to be a heck of a matchup between the two because the 49ers backers can cover. Sam Laporta is one of the bright young stars at tight end. Gibbs is one of the bright young stars at running back. I can't wait to see what that looks like too.
So when the Cowboys lost in Wild Card Weekend, it just seems like all of a sudden Detroit has become America's team the last couple of weeks in the betting market.
How do you not root for them?
Well, no, and I agree with that. But having said that, rather, even with all the public bets on Detroit, the line keeps creeping towards San Francisco through the touchdown to 7.5. So with that in mind, and Pete, the hook matters. Where do you want to go here in terms of which side you're on?
It always matters.
It does, but you gave him some crap for changing his pick during the week because the hook had changed. Remember that?
Because you give one side one pick, one side the other.
That's how it works. That's how it works.
I'm going to take the Lions and the points. I think this is up and down the field. I think it's tight. I think the 49ers win the game. I think the 49ers go to the Super Bowl. But I think the Lions will hang around. It'll be fun to watch. I think both offenses will have big days.
You said tight, and I think that's the word that I want to key on here because I think it's going to be a lower scoring, tight game between these two. And I do think the line move in two ways. Debo playing, being off the injury report, and then Oshika in for Jonah Jackson, too. I think there's some concern there about maybe the Lions' offensive line. So I'm going to go ahead and lay the points here with San Francisco. I don't feel good about it at all. I think the over-under, to me, on this game is a better play. I like the under. I know we're on completely different sides on this one, but I think it'll be a tighter, lower-scoring affair between these two.
All right. We'll see how it all plays out at Levi's Stadium. Again, the NFC Championship game will be the late game here on this Sunday. Our senior NFL insider, Josina Anderson, is in Santa Clara. We'll have updates pre and post game here on CBS Sports HQ. We'll also check in with reporter Melanie Collins during our 1-hour pre-game show leading up to the start of the AFC Championship game on CBS at 3 Eastern.